The reflection in the mirror looked perfect, at least on the surface. James Whitaker, a successful single father and CEO of a global investment firm, adjusted the final button on his tuxedo as if preparing for battle. The cufflinks gleamed under the golden light, his tie sat razor-sharp against the collar, and yet the man staring back wasn't the polished titan his colleagues admired. Behind the clean lines of the suit was exhaustion. Grief had carved its quiet marks around his eyes, and though his posture was impeccable, his spirit carried the weight of years without his wife. On the dresser beside him sat a silver picture frame. Inside was a photograph of a woman with auburn hair and kind eyes holding their baby girl, Emma. James's jaw tightened as he traced the outline of the picture with a glance, the ache of absence settling over him like it always did. His wife, Claire, had been gone for nearly 4 years. Cancer had taken her swiftly, mercilessly, leaving James not just a widower but the sole anchor to a little girl who still asked about her mother's lullabies. A knock at the door broke his thoughts. "Mr. Whitaker," his assistant called, "the delegation from Tokyo has just arrived. They're expecting your guest." James checked his watch. His guest. The word left a bitter taste. Tonight wasn't about romance or companionship, it was about appearances. At events like the Whitaker Foundation Gala, perception mattered almost as much as the millions pledged in donations. And so in a moment of quiet desperation, James had done something he never imagined. He'd hired someone to stand at his side, a woman recommended through a discreet service. He didn't know her full name, just the alias she used, Lauren, highly rated, professional, poised, the kind of presence that could soothe wary investors and silence prying questions about his lonely personal life. Elsewhere across town, Lauren Pierce adjusted the satin sleeve of her navy gown in a cramped dressing room. Her golden hair fell in soft waves around her shoulders, her eyes steady even as her hands trembled for the briefest second. She had played this part before. Charming partner, elegant date, the picture of composure. Smile when needed, fade into the background when not. But something about tonight unsettled her. "It's just another role," she whispered to her reflection. "Get in, smile, get out." Yet when she finally stepped into the grand ballroom, chandeliers scattering light like liquid gold, everything shifted. James was waiting among executives, his expression controlled, unreadable. But the moment his gaze landed on her, something flickered. Hesitation, recognition, maybe even longing. Before he could speak, a high-pitched voice cut through the air. "Daddy!" A small girl in a pink tulle dress bounded across the marble floor, curls bouncing, eyes wide with excitement. But instead of running straight into her father's arms, Emma stopped in front of Lauren. With childlike certainty, she slipped her tiny hand into the stranger's. "Can she stay forever?" The gala stilled. Laughter rippled through the crowd, softening the room's stiff formality. James stood frozen, his carefully built mask slipping just enough to reveal the man beneath, the father, the widower, the human. And as Lauren knelt instinctively to meet Emma's gaze, James realized that tonight might not be a performance after all. It might be the beginning of something neither of them had expected. The Whitaker Foundation Gala was the kind of event that demanded perfection. Crystal chandeliers shimmered above marble floors, and every corner of the grand ballroom buzzed with the mingling of power and wealth. Waiters glided with trays of champagne, string quartets played with precision, and executives from around the world exchanged firm handshakes wrapped in polite smiles. James Whitaker moved among them effortlessly, his posture straight, his voice even, his presence commanding. To most he was the picture of composure, a man who had rebuilt his empire after tragedy. But beneath the sharp tuxedo and rehearsed pleasantries, James felt like an actor trapped in a script he no longer believed in. Every word was a transaction, every smile a mask. And then Lauren appeared. She entered the ballroom with a grace that drew eyes without demanding them. Her navy gown shimmered subtly under the lights, her golden hair falling in gentle waves against her shoulders. She walked toward James as if they had been doing this for years, arm outstretched, smile poised, eyes steady. "Mr. Whitaker," she asked softly, her voice calm, measured. James blinked, momentarily forgetting the crowd around him. "Yes, Lauren?" She smiled, slipping her arm into his. "That's me." The gesture was fluid, natural, like two puzzle pieces finding their match. For the first time that evening, James felt the weight on his shoulders ease just slightly. Before he could form another word, a voice pierced the air. "Daddy!" Emma's little voice was as bright as a bell, carrying across the room. Heads turned as the small girl bounded across the polished floor in her pink tulle dress, curls bouncing with every step. But instead of running straight into her father's arms, Emma stopped directly in front of Lauren. Lauren instinctively knelt to Emma's level, her gown pooling around her on the marble. "Hi there," she said warmly, her smile softening as she met the child's wide-eyed stare. Emma didn't hesitate. She slipped her small hand into Lauren's. "Can she stay forever?" she asked, her voice carrying with the innocent certainty only a child could have. The ballroom erupted in laughter and hushed chuckles. The stiff air of formality dissolved as executives softened, their expressions turning to genuine smiles. James stood frozen, stunned not only by his daughter's words, but by how natural Lauren's response seemed. Lauren gathered Emma gently into her arms, balancing the child on her hip like she'd done it 100 times. "Forever's a big word," she said with a playful wink, "but I think we can start with tonight." The crowd melted. Even the Tokyo delegation, notoriously difficult to impress, leaned in with visible warmth. Mr. Nakamura, the head of the group, extended his hand toward Lauren. "You must be Lauren," he said with a rare smile. Lauren adjusted Emma lightly on her hip and offered her free hand. "Yes, and you must be Mr. Nakamura. James has spoken about your vision for sustainable AI. Your plans to merge efficiency with responsibility are inspiring." Nakamura raised his brows, clearly impressed. "You know of my work?" "I follow community development closely," she replied, her tone genuine. "Technology is powerful, but it only matters if it reaches the people who need it most." The room shifted. Suddenly, conversations weren't just with James Whitaker, the powerful CEO. They were with a family, a man, his daughter, and a woman who seemed to belong at their side. Lauren's elegance wasn't stiff, it was disarming. She guided Emma gently whenever she grew restless, turning interruptions into moments of charm. When a guest complimented the beauty of the venue, Lauren added with an easy smile, "James wanted it to reflect the best of both cultures. He worked hard on every detail." James felt his chest tighten at her words. She wasn't just flattering him, she was protecting him, weaving warmth into spaces where his usual walls stood. Across the room, one of the Tokyo executives leaned toward James and whispered with a chuckle, "She's wonderful, warm. You are a very lucky man." James opened his mouth to correct him, to remind him this was all an arrangement, nothing more. But as he looked at Lauren, her laughter mingling with Emma's giggles, her eyes glowing with sincerity, something inside him stopped. The lie on his tongue dissolved, replaced by a smile he didn't have to fake. For the rest of the evening, Lauren carried herself with a balance James had rarely seen in anyone. She wasn't trying to be the center of attention, but she was present, fully, genuinely present. When Emma grew sleepy and laid her head on Lauren's shoulder, Lauren didn't falter. She simply shifted her weight, cradled the child against her, and continued a conversation about education and innovation, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. James stood beside them, silent but profoundly aware. This wasn't the performance he had paid for. This was something else, something real slipping through the cracks of a carefully constructed illusion. And as the night drew to a close, as the chandeliers dimmed and the last champagne glasses clinked, James found himself staring at Lauren with a question lodged deep in his chest, one he hadn't dared to feel in years. What if this wasn't pretend at all? The gala had ended hours ago, but James Whitaker found himself standing at the front door of his townhouse, unwilling to let the night slip away. The house looked as it always did, sleek lines, minimalist decor, every detail carefully curated. Yet to him, it had always felt too quiet, too empty. The black car pulled up, and Lauren stepped out into the glow of the porch light. Her navy gown still shimmered faintly, though the exhaustion of the evening clung to her in the delicate curve of her shoulders. She looked composed, but James saw something else in her eyes, hesitation, the awareness that whatever happened next might push the boundaries of what they had both agreed upon. "I figured," James said, holding the door open, "since we made quite the impression tonight, we might as well finish the role with dinner." Lauren arched a brow, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "For consistency, of course." He nodded, though they both knew the truth was simpler. He didn't want the evening to end without seeing her again. Inside, the home carried the same elegance as James himself. Orderly, polished, deliberate. But Lauren noticed something else beneath the perfection. Silence. the kind of silence that lingered in rooms where laughter hadn't lived for too long. Before either could speak, a high-pitched squeal shattered the quiet. "Mommy Z!" Emma barreled into the hallway in fuzzy unicorn pajamas, curls tumbling wildly as she ran. She launched herself into Lauren's arms, clinging tightly as though they hadn't just seen each other hours ago. Lauren caught her instinctively, laughing softly. "Mommy Z?" Emma beamed. "That's your name now. You're the mommy in our pretend family. Daddy's the daddy, I'm the baby, and you're Mommy Z." James froze, his brows lifting. "Is that so?" Emma nodded with the conviction only a child could muster. "Yes, and now we have to play. Daddy, you go to work. You say goodbye. That's what daddies do." James and Lauren exchanged a glance, awkward, amused, a little startled. James sighed, adjusting his cufflinks. "Well, I suppose I have my assignment." He leaned down, pressing a kiss to Emma's forehead. "Goodbye, sweetheart." Emma pointed at Lauren with all the seriousness of a tiny director. "Kiss her too. That's what daddies do." For a moment the air stilled. Lauren's cheeks flushed and James's jaw tightened with hesitation. But Emma's wide eyes left no room for refusal. James bent slightly, placing the briefest, most polite kiss against Lauren's cheek. Something shifted, not awkward, not staged, just still. Lauren's smile flickered, soft and barely there, but real. Emma giggled triumphantly, tugging Lauren toward the living room where a circle of plush animals and plastic teacups waited on the rug. "Now we have dinner together. Mommy Z sits here. Daddy, you sit there. We're a family." Lauren sank onto the rug, smoothing her gown beneath her. James followed, loosening his tie as he lowered himself into the circle of stuffed toys. Emma poured imaginary tea with great ceremony, assigning everyone roles. Lauren played along seamlessly, raising a cup of air with mock elegance. "Delicious," she declared, making Emma squeal with laughter. James watched them both. The way Lauren's laughter lit the room, the way Emma leaned against her like she had always belonged. He felt something he hadn't allowed himself in years, warmth spreading through the silence. Later, after Emma had been tucked into bed with her stuffed bunny and whispered goodnights, Lauren wandered into the kitchen while James made tea. The clink of the spoon against porcelain filled the stillness. She paused by the counter, her eyes catching on a silver picture frame. A woman with auburn hair, smiling despite her tired eyes, held a newborn Emma wrapped in hospital blankets. Lauren picked it up gently. "She's beautiful," she whispered. James's voice was quiet behind her. "Claire, she passed when Emma was just 3 months old. Cancer." Lauren turned slowly, her expression softening. "I'm so sorry." James nodded, his jaw set, quick, unforgiving. He hesitated, then added, "She would have liked you." For a moment, Lauren couldn't speak. She placed the photo back carefully. "Even if I'm just the pretend version?" she asked lightly, though her voice trembled. James's gaze lingered on her, softer now, stripped of the CEO's armor. "Sometimes," he said slowly, "pretend is the only thing that feels real." The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was intimate, fragile, alive. Lauren's heart pounded, the truth pressing against the edges of her chest. This didn't feel like a performance anymore. Not with Emma's laughter still echoing upstairs, not with James watching her like he was seeing something he hadn't let himself see in years. For the first time in a long time, she felt as though she wasn't playing a part. She was simply herself, broken, mending, real. And as they sat at the kitchen table with untouched cups of tea cooling between them, both James and Lauren knew something had shifted. This was no longer just an arrangement. It was the fragile beginning of something neither of them had expected, yet both desperately needed. The next morning, sunlight streamed softly through the Whitaker townhouse, filling the quiet kitchen with a warmth that felt almost unfamiliar. Lauren stood at the sink rinsing strawberries for Emma's breakfast, her golden hair tied back in a loose braid. She hummed absent-mindedly, a melody she hadn't realized she still remembered. Emma padded in, still in her polka-dot pajamas, bunny in hand. "What song is that?" she asked, tilting her head. Lauren froze for a moment, the sound catching in her throat. She smiled faintly. "It's a piece from Giselle, a ballet I used to love." Emma's eyes lit up. "Ballet? Like the fairies in the video I saw? Can you do that?" The question landed heavy. For a heartbeat, Lauren's smile wavered. She set the strawberries aside, drying her hands carefully before kneeling to meet Emma's curious gaze. "I used to," she admitted softly, "a long time ago." James had been standing in the doorway, unnoticed, watching the exchange. His brow furrowed at the tenderness in Lauren's tone. the way her eyes dimmed with something unspoken. Later that evening, after Emma had gone to bed, James found Lauren sitting on the back patio beneath the faint glow of string lights. She was wrapped in one of his oversized flannel shirts, her bare feet tucked under her, a mug of tea cooling in her hands. The night air carried the faint scent of lavender from the garden, but her expression was far away, caught somewhere between memory and grief. "You looked like you were somewhere else this morning," James said gently, settling into the chair across from her. Lauren hesitated, staring down at the steam rising from her cup. Finally she spoke. "I was 17 when I got my first chance. Paris, the Opera Garnier. My instructor said I was born for it. I lived for the stage, the music, the lights, the way everything else disappeared when I danced. For one perfect moment, it felt like the world belonged to me." Her voice caught. She swallowed hard, her hands tightening on the mug. "And then during rehearsal, one wrong landing. A crack, a scream, and silence. The doctor said I was lucky to walk again, but ballet..." She shook her head slowly. "That dream was gone before it ever truly began." James said nothing at first, his gaze steady, patient. "And you've carried that loss ever since," he said finally, his voice low. Lauren let out a shaky laugh. "Carried it? It's carved into me. I spent years trying to play roles that weren't mine because the one I wanted most was ripped away. Pretend girlfriend, polished date, smiling when I was breaking inside. It was easier than admitting I was just empty." Her voice trailed off, but James leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "I know what it's like," he said quietly, "to build your life around someone or something and lose it overnight. To wake up with nothing but silence." Their eyes met across the small table, and for a moment the weight of their separate griefs pressed into the air, making it heavy, almost suffocating. And yet, underneath, there was understanding. Not pity, recognition. The next afternoon, it was Emma who unknowingly broke through the tension. She tiptoed up to Lauren while she was folding laundry, tugging gently at her sleeve. "Can you teach me?" Lauren blinked. "Teach you what, sweetheart?" Emma grinned shyly. "To dance, like the fairies." For a long second, Lauren's breath caught. She hadn't danced in years. Not really. But Emma's hopeful eyes undid every hesitation. Lauren knelt, brushing a curl from the girl's cheek. "All right," she whispered. "We'll start small." Out on the patio under the soft afternoon sun, Lauren connected her phone to the small speaker. A gentle ballet melody filled the air, delicate and sweet. She slipped off her sandals, letting her feet find the warmth of the stone tiles. "First, we breathe," she instructed, taking Emma's tiny hands. "Arms up, slow, like reaching for the sky." Emma giggled as she wobbled, nearly tumbling into Lauren's waist. Lauren laughed too, steadying her. "It's okay. Even fairies fall sometimes." From the kitchen window, James froze mid-step. He had been reaching for a glass of water, but the sight outside pulled him still. Lauren, barefoot in the sunlight, guiding his daughter in small circles. Emma's dress caught the breeze, her laughter ringing through the yard like music. James's hand tightened on the glass until he set it down, realizing his chest ached with something unfamiliar. It wasn't the sharp pain of grief, but a stirring he hadn't felt in years, something alive. Outside, Lauren lifted Emma gently into her arms, spinning her once, the child's curls fanning out like petals in bloom. Emma shrieked with delight, clinging to her neck. Lauren's laughter followed, light and unguarded. In that moment, James realized it wasn't just Emma who was learning to dance again. It was Lauren, and maybe, just maybe, it was him too. Later that night, when Emma had fallen asleep with her arms curled in a dancer's pose, James found Lauren still sitting on the patio, her gaze lifted to the stars. "She lights up with you," he said quietly. Lauren turned, startled. "She's special." "She is?" James agreed, his voice softened. "But so are you." For the first time, Lauren didn't deflect. She let the words linger, let them settle, and though nothing more was said, both of them felt the undeniable truth in the silence. This was no longer about pretending. This was about healing, about two broken souls finding rhythm again in the laughter of a little girl who had asked the simplest, most powerful question of all. "Can you teach me to dance?" It was a rainy afternoon, the kind of day when the world felt smaller. The walls of the Whitaker townhouse closing in under the weight of gray skies. Emma had fallen asleep after a morning of peanut butter sandwiches and playing make-believe ballerina, and James was locked away in his office, his voice echoing faintly through a conference call upstairs. Lauren, left alone with the rare silence, decided to tackle the hallway closet Maria had once mentioned needed organizing. It was stuffed to the brim with coats, holiday decorations, and forgotten boxes. She pulled each item down carefully, humming to herself as she sorted. Her hand brushed against a cardboard box shoved into the back corner. The marker on the side was faint but still legible. Emma, 6 months. The edges were soft with age, the tape yellowed. Lauren hesitated, then slid it down and carried it to the floor. Inside she found tiny dresses, knitted hats, a rattle with Emma's name engraved in silver. She smiled softly, running her hand over the delicate fabric, her chest tightening with the reminder of a time she hadn't been part of. Near the bottom, wrapped in tissue paper, something caught her eye. She peeled back the layers and her breath caught. A pair of miniature ballet slippers. Pale pink satin, the ribbons still untied, the toes worn slightly, as if they had been placed on Emma's tiny feet once or twice for a photograph. A dream, a hope, a gesture from Claire, no doubt. Lauren's hand trembled as she lifted them. She sat back against the wall, clutching the shoes as though they might vanish. The satin was soft, fragile in her grip, but the weight of them was unbearable. A crack opened inside her chest, a fault line she had tried for years to seal shut. Tears came before she could stop them. Not the quiet kind she had practiced in the past, but deep, raw sobs that shook her whole body. She cried for the girl she had been at 17, standing in the spotlight for one fleeting moment before everything shattered. She cried for the future that had been stolen from her in a single fall, for the stage that had once been her home, and for the emptiness she had tried to fill by pretending to be someone else. And she cried for Emma, for the tiny pink slippers, for the mother who had chosen them, for the life that child might have had if tragedy hadn't cut it short. She curled against the wall, clutching the ballet shoes to her chest as though they were the last fragile thread connecting her to the dream she had buried, and the child she was slowly, painfully beginning to love like her own. She didn't hear the footsteps at first. She didn't notice James standing in the doorway until she lifted her tear-streaked face, startled and ashamed. He didn't speak. He didn't ask what was wrong. He simply took in the sight of her, crumpled on the floor, holding his daughter's first ballet shoes, shoulders shaking with grief she couldn't hide. For a long moment he disappeared. Then he returned, kneeling silently beside her. He placed a box of tissues within reach, close enough that she wouldn't have to ask, but far enough not to intrude. He didn't say, "I'm sorry." He didn't say, "I understand." He said nothing at all. Lauren looked up at him through blurred eyes, and in that silence, something passed between them. Not pity, not curiosity, recognition. A quiet understanding only two people who had lost too much could ever share. James lowered himself until he was sitting beside her on the floor, his back against the opposite wall. He didn't look at her, didn't press. He just sat there, his presence steady, his gaze on the tiny slippers in her hands. For several minutes they said nothing. The only sounds were the rain against the windows and Lauren's shaky breaths. Eventually, the sobs slowed. She wiped her face with the edge of her sleeve, sniffled, and glanced sideways at him. "Thank you," she whispered hoarsely. He nodded once, his eyes still fixed on the shoes. "You don't have to explain," he said quietly. Her chin trembled. "I lost something too," she admitted, her voice breaking. "Not like Claire, not like Emma, but something I thought I'd never get back. And when I saw these—" She trailed off, shaking her head. "It just broke me all over again." James finally turned to her, his gaze softer than she had ever seen. "Then maybe," he said slowly, "you and I aren't as different as we thought." Her breath caught. She wanted to look away, but his eyes held her there. She wasn't the woman he had hired for an evening anymore. She wasn't the polished stranger who could charm executives and play the perfect role. Sitting there on the floor with tear-streaked cheeks and trembling hands, she was simply Lauren. And for the first time in years someone saw her. Not the mask, not the performance, but the woman beneath. The rain outside softened, the storm passing. Lauren loosened her grip on the slippers, her hands falling gently into her lap. James reached over, hesitated, then placed his hand lightly over hers. She didn't pull away. And in that fragile moment, sitting in the quiet hallway surrounded by forgotten boxes and rain-washed silence, they both realized something had shifted. This wasn't pretend anymore, this was real. The day had been heavy with summer humidity, the kind that made the air thick and restless. Inside the Whitaker house, Ava was buzzing with boundless energy, her tiny socks slipping across the polished hardwood as she played tag with her stuffed bunny. Coloring books and crayons littered the living room rug, remnants of a morning filled with giggles and messy imagination. Lauren was kneeling by the coffee table, stacking the scattered crayons into their box when Ava darted suddenly toward the hallway. "I'm going to show Daddy my jump," she announced, her curls bouncing as she ran. Lauren's heart skipped. "Ava, wait, don't run near the stairs." But before the words had fully left her mouth, there was a sharp slip, a hollow thump, then silence. Lauren froze, her blood turning cold. She dropped the crayon box and sprinted down the hallway, her stomach twisting as she reached the bottom of the staircase. There, crumpled on the floor, was Ava. Her small hands clutched her knee, tears streaming down her pale face. "Ava!" Lauren dropped to her knees, panic rising like a tidal wave. She gathered the child into her arms, her voice trembling. "Oh my God, baby, are you okay? Look at me, sweetheart, look at me." A faint scrape marked the child's knee, but to Lauren it looked catastrophic. Her breaths came in shallow bursts. Her mind replayed a sound she had spent her whole life trying to forget. Her brother's fall, the silence after. Her throat closed, she whispered to herself, "Not again, please, not again." Ava whimpered, clutching tighter against Lauren's chest. "It hurts," she sobbed. Lauren's hands shook violently as she wrapped Ava in a blanket, fumbling for her car keys. "I'm taking you to the hospital. You're going to be okay, I promise." She barely remembered the drive, the blur of stoplights, the pounding rain against the windshield, the sound of Ava's soft cries from the back seat. By the time they reached the ER, her face was streaked with tears. Inside the sterile waiting room, Lauren sat with Ava curled in her lap, kissing her forehead over and over. "You're safe," she whispered, rocking gently. "It's just a scratch, nothing more. You're so brave." The nurse gave her a kind smile. "It looks minor, but we'll do an X-ray to be safe. She'll be fine." Lauren nodded numbly, but her hands wouldn't stop trembling. The doors to the children's wing burst open moments later. James rushed in, his eyes wild, searching. He spotted them instantly and hurried across the room, his breath sharp. "What happened?" Lauren looked up, her face pale, her arms locked around Ava like she was made of glass. "She fell at the stairs. I wasn't fast enough." Her voice cracked. "I thought I lost her, James." He looked down at his daughter, who was calmer now, her cheeks still wet with tears, but her breathing steadier. Relief washed across his features, but when his gaze lifted to Lauren, something inside him softened even more. She tried to speak again, but her throat closed. "She's not even mine, but Her voice broke completely. "I thought I lost her." Tears spilled over her lashes, raw and unstoppable. She looked away, ashamed, as if exposing too much of herself. James didn't hesitate. He stepped forward and wrapped his arms around both of them. Ava nestled between them, Lauren stiff for just a moment before collapsing into his chest. Her shoulders shook against him, her sobs muffled against his shirt. He held them both like it was the most natural thing in the world. Strong, steady, unyielding. Ava stirred slightly, drowsy now from the nurse's reassurance, and murmured through half-closed eyes, "Mommy, see." The nickname sliced through James like truth. He tightened his hold, his voice rough but tender. "She's okay," he whispered, pressing a kiss to his daughter's curls. "You both are." The three of them stayed locked in that embrace for what felt like forever, the noise of the hospital fading into nothing but heartbeats and breaths. No contracts, no roles, no pretending, just connection. When Lauren finally pulled back, her face streaked with tears, she whispered, "I'm sorry. I should have been—" "No," James interrupted gently, his hands still steadying her shoulders. "You were exactly who she needed." His eyes met hers, and in that instant something shifted. He saw her fear, her love, her heart laid bare, and she saw his, the father who had carried grief like armor, now willing to let it crack open. Back at the house later that night, Ava slept curled between them on the couch, her tiny hands wrapped around her stuffed bunny. Lauren stroked the child's hair softly, her movements tender. James sat beside them, silent but present. For a long moment they simply breathed in unison, the storm outside fading into a soft drizzle. James reached across the couch and took Lauren's hand. This time she didn't pull away, and though neither spoke, both of them knew the truth. Something had changed. They weren't just pretending anymore. They were building something real, something fragile, unexpected, but deeply, undeniably theirs. The morning broke heavy and gray, the kind of sky that pressed low on the earth. James sat in his office surrounded by contracts and glowing screens, yet his mind wasn't on numbers or negotiations. His phone buzzed with a message from an old associate. At first, it seemed harmless. "Thought you should know Zoe's done this before. Check the forums." Attached was a screenshot. James clicked without thinking, then froze. There she was, Lauren. Not in the navy gown from the gala, not laughing with Emma in the living room, but in a grainy photograph, smiling in a red dress, her hair swept back, her gaze polished. The text beside it was blunt. Event companion. Discreet. Professional. Business dinners, galas, travel. By appointment only. James's chest tightened. His grip on the phone went rigid. He told himself it was the past, that people did what they had to do to survive, but the words burrowed deep. You're not the first. That night, when Lauren came down the stairs in a soft cardigan, her hair still damp from the shower, she found James waiting in the kitchen. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't warm. He stood stiffly, his phone on the counter, the screen glowing faintly with the damning image. "Is there anything you want to tell me?" His voice was too calm, too sharp. Lauren stopped mid-step. "About what?" He turned the phone toward her. "About this." Her face drained of color. The breath left her lungs. She swallowed hard, then nodded slowly. "Yes, I was going to tell you. I used to do that, not anymore." "How many?" James asked, his jaw tight. Her lips parted, stung. "Does it matter?" "Yes," he snapped, the word cutting the air like glass. "Because I need to know if any of this, if you with Emma, if all of it, was just another performance." Lauren flinched. Her voice rose, trembling with hurt. "You think I could fake that kind of love? You think I could pretend every time she called me Mommy Z, every time she clung to me like I was the only safe place she had?" James's silence was worse than words. His eyes flicked away, the doubt already lodged too deep. Lauren blinked rapidly, fighting tears. "I never lied about what I used to do. I survived the only way I knew how. But with her, with you, it stopped being pretend a long time ago." James swallowed, his throat tight. He wanted to believe her, but the ghosts of betrayal and loss twisted his judgment. I don't know what to believe anymore." The finality in his tone was a blade. Lauren's chest constricted. She nodded once, slowly, then turned. By the time she stepped outside, rain had begun to fall. Soft at first, then pounding, soaking her thin sweater in seconds. She didn't run. She walked, every step heavy, her heart breaking louder than the storm. Inside, James wandered the halls like a man haunted. Hours passed. When he finally reached the guest room, the door was ajar. The bed was perfectly made. The closet was empty. And on the nightstand sat a folded piece of paper. His hands shook as he picked it up. The ink bled slightly where tears had fallen, but the words were steady. "James, I've played roles for years. Pretended to be someone I wasn't. Smiled when I was breaking inside. Held hands with strangers who never even knew my name. I was good at it, too good. So good I forgot what it felt like to be real. Until Emma. I never expected you to trust me. But I hoped, God, I hoped, that one day I'd be more than the woman you hired. That you saw what I felt. That it wasn't pretend anymore. Yes, I've acted before. But with you I didn't know how to stop. I didn't want to. I'm sorry I wasn't enough. I'm sorry I let the past stain what we had. Tell Emma, tell her I never wanted to leave her. Tell her she was the first person in years who made me believe I could still belong somewhere. Lauren." The letter slipped in his hands. Rain still tapped against the windows, but the house had never felt emptier. James stood in the silent room, the weight of his daughter's laughter, Lauren's quiet strength, and the truth of her words pressing down on him. For the first time in weeks, he felt the full force of what he had lost. Not a hired companion, not a performance, but something real. And as the storm raged outside, James finally admitted to himself what he had been too afraid to say aloud. He hadn't just let Lauren walk away. He had pushed her. And in doing so, he had torn apart the only family that had ever felt whole since Claire. The rain had passed by morning, leaving the city washed clean, the streets glistening with silver puddles. But inside the Whitaker house, everything still felt heavy, hollow. The guest room was empty, the letter folded and refolded in James's hand until the paper grew soft. He barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, He saw Lauren's tear-streaked face, heard her broken voice echoing in his mind. With you, I didn't know how to stop. By dawn, he couldn't stand it anymore. He grabbed his coat, ignoring the ache in his chest, and drove across town. He knew exactly where she would be. Lauren's small apartment was tucked above a bakery, the windows fogged slightly from the steam below. He climbed the stairs 2 at a time, his pulse hammering. He didn't knock gently. He pounded until the door finally swung open. She stood there, hair tangled, eyes swollen from crying. Surprise flickered across her face, followed by guarded silence. James held up the letter, his voice raw. You think walking away fixes this? You think leaving erases what we had? Her chin trembled. I hurt you. I should never have. No. His voice broke, but he stepped closer anyway. You saved me. You saved Emma. And I was too blind, too damn scared to see that the past doesn't define who you are now. Tears welled in her eyes. James! He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something small, wrapped in tissue. He placed it gently in her hands. Her breath caught when she unfolded it. The tiny pink ballet slippers. I kept them, he whispered, because they reminded me of dreams, mine, Emma's, even yours. And last night when you left, I realized something. It doesn't matter where you came from, Lauren. What matters is who you've become. The woman who held my daughter when she was afraid. The woman who taught her to dance again. The woman who taught me how to feel again. Her tears spilled freely now, blurring her vision. I don't need perfect, James said, his voice unsteady. I just need real, and you're the most real thing that's ever happened to us. For a long moment, neither moved. Then Lauren let out a shaky breath and stepped forward, collapsing into his embrace. He held her tightly, as if he would never let her go again. From somewhere down the hall, a child's sleepy voice called out, Mommy Z! Lauren froze, then looked up at James. He smiled through his tears. She's been waiting for you. And in that fragile, perfect moment, Lauren finally understood she wasn't an outsider anymore. She was home.